gentlemen. My name is Emeka Obokara. I'm a partner with Nextier Power. I'm delighted to welcome you to the final edition of this year's Nextier Power Dialogue. Today's theme is privatization, the right solution for Nigeria's power sector problems. Nigeria's power sector challenges affect us, each and every one of us, every day. The privatization of the industry was a very bold step by the former administration. While some will argue that it has not worked, some will say give it time, as it takes time to develop. Today, our esteemed panelists will debate this topic with one team proposing and one team opposing. If you have not voted, please go ahead and do so. You can vote at meti.com. And the code is 743038. That's 743038. We're definitely looking forward to today's event. It's going to be very exciting and insightful. Without further ado, I want to introduce my colleague, Mr. Patrick Akibo, who will introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Emeka. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the December 2017 Nextier Power Dialogue. My name is Patrick Akibo. I'm Principal Partner Nextier. Every month, we organize these sessions. We have three core objectives. The first is to create a platform to share ideas and solutions for the power sector. The second is also to create a platform to advocate policies and programs that will move the sector forward. And the third is to create an opportunity for people to network, create business opportunities, both within and outside the sector. But this month's session is a bit of a departure from the standard format we use. Typically, we'll have a panel to discuss a topic, but this month we thought we should have a bit of a debate. Why? At the beginning of the reform process, the sector wasn't performing right, and a set of reforms were put in place, and one of those was privatization. The sale of previously owned, government-owned assets in the power sector to private investors. Some would argue that since the sale, at least since like generation capacity has increased to about 13,000 megawatts, but some would also counter that the market hasn't fully developed and that the epileptic power supply, or in fact non-supply of power, continues. So, 4 years post-privatization, ever so often the question comes up, should we have privatized? Should government take back the assets? We thought it would be good to use this debate to finally extinguish this topic. With me to do justice to the topic are senior industry insiders. On my right is the proposing team, and they're proposing that privatization is the right solution for the Nigeria's power sector problems. And on my left is the opposing team. Until recently, Enyo Ipo was a commissioner at the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission. He was responsible for market, competition, and rates. Prior to that role, he was special advisor on special projects to the governor of Cross River State. He is currently an executive in business development at GE Transportation. Eyo, you're welcome to the program. On his team and supporting the proposition that privatization is the right solution for the sector is Chantel Abdul. Chantel is the CEO of Mojek Power. And Mojek Power is a leading provider of electricity solutions, especially meters, prepaid meters for the sector. She's the founder of Mojek Meter Installer Training School, and she recently won the award as Female Power Sector Pioneer at the recently concluded 2007 WAPIC conference. Please, a round of applause for the center. We have an equally formidable team opposing that motion. Sam Amadi is the immediate past chairman of the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission. Earlier in his career, he was special advisor to the Senate President. He's also a graduate of Kennedy School of Government. Many commentators on social media have wondered how a former chairman of the power sector regulator could be against privatization. What they don't know or forget is that Sam was an author, or is the author of a book, Privatization and Public Good, The Rule of Law Challenge. We've got it downstairs. You should get a copy if you haven't already. Where he took a very strong position. And I think the discussion this evening will give you an opportunity to lay out those arguments. Sam, you're welcome. And last but definitely not the least is Joe Ajero. He's the General Secretary of National Union of Electricity Employees. Joe was a major force to be reckoned with during the privatization period. He fought the Jonathan government to extract all kinds of concessions and benefits for employees in the sector. The first time I met him was it was a bit of an adversarial situation, which we're not going to get into today. He's also the president of the United Labour Congress, and Ajero, you're very welcome too. Okay, so here are some basic housekeeping, right? If you look at your agenda, you'll see that we've asked you to vote on menti.com to this question. We're really interested in getting your views on this question before we start the debate. So if you haven't voted, please go ahead and do that right away. MENTI, menti.com. And there's a code which Emeka is going to announce in a minute. So per the agenda, each of the debaters will be invited to spend about 10 minutes laying out their position on the question, on the motion. That should take about 40 odd minutes, after which we'll open it up for comments, questions from participants. We'll take the comments and questions and we'll give the panel an opportunity to respond. And after the responses, we'll then go to a second round of closing arguments. So we'll invite one person from each side to lay their closing arguments in 5 minutes. We'll then ask you to vote again on menti.com. And we would like to see how your views may have shifted during the course of this debate. Without further ado, permit me to invite my friend and brother and Oga, Eyo Ebo, to take about 10 minutes to lay out his arguments why he thinks that privatization is the right solution for Nigeria's power sector challenges. Eyo.
I will have to disappoint you because I'm not exactly going to propose what the motion I have been asked to propose. Just like most of you here, I have looked forward to an event like this. Patrick, is this part of my 10 minutes?
This is the guy's highlight.
I have looked forward to to an event like that. What I didn't anticipate was that I would be one of the people speaking. I thought I would just come and listen and make a contribution. I don't think, speaking seriously, that we have been asked to speak to the right question. I think it's the wrong question, actually. It goes without saying in 2017 that privatization has had benefits. and I don't think it's really matter for discussion. The sector has opened up. All sorts of things that we didn't think possible are happening. We no longer have just a government entity that is the only player like has happened in many other infrastructure sectors. My co-debater here on my side of the aisle, on the right side of Patrick, is a living testimony to this. Not just herself, but also many others like her. Today, we are talking no longer about publicly provided power supply. We're talking about how the industry has been commoditized and it has turned into a retail market. Household solar, renewable energy, and what it is going to do to the sector has shown exactly what private sector participation can do. So I don't think that we are speaking to the right question today. Privatization is only one of the policy measures that was put in place by the Ambassador administration in the process of reform. And that is really what I would like to address this evening. So first, let me try and explain why I think the question is the wrong one. It speaks across two dimensions. Number one, privatization is not over. It hasn't, in fact, I think it's barely started, to be honest with you. Why? Because we know that there are in Nigeria today, there are 4 sectors in the power business. There's distribution, there's transmission, there's generation, and of course, for those of us who really think about it deeply enough, there's fuel supply, which in Nigeria is gas. 2 out of those 4 are not privatized at all. And they're the 2 most critical for the power sector. The transmission of energy, the transmission of electricity, and the transmission of gas have not been privatized. So for anybody that really understands the sector to say that we have privatized is to only say that we've done probably about 25-30% of what needs to be done. Because until those 2 bottlenecks in the movement of energy, both of gas and of electricity, are opened up to private sector participation, we can never say that we have privatized. So that's one dimension. The other dimension speaks to the fact that, as I said earlier, privatization is neither the end-all nor the be-all of the reform process. It's only one in a step, and I'll address presently those other reform actions that were enunciated in our electricity power policy of 2001 and then detailed in the Electric Power Sector Reform Act. So that when you look at those 2 pieces of legislation and policy, you'll come to realize that privatization is only a step, an important step, but nevertheless still a step in a series of very, very carefully thought through and detailed reform actions that we have tried to implement in Nigeria since 2005 when the Power Sector Reform Act was passed. So very quickly, I have answered the questions in the affirmative, and I guess I could go and sit down now. But why should I give up? I know Sam might come up here and say that, well, since the year has given up in 7 minutes, let me take something like that in my 10 minutes. I don't give that opportunity at all. Let me speak up and just try and point at the fact that various other sectors have equally been reformed in Nigeria and have brought tremendous benefits to us. Ports, aviation, banking, telecommunications, pensions, petrochemicals, and of course the associated fertilizer business. These were all dominated entirely 100% by the government. They've been let go, and we know what these sectors have done for us in Nigeria and for our economy. But let me point at specific power sector reform measures, and I'll look at 6 or 7 of them. Between 2006 and 2008, the very first, our predecessors in office in NERC, led by Ransom Owen, did very important work of laying down the ground rules, the regulations by which the sector would be regulated. Because after the act had been passed, NEPA had been unbundled, and successor companies had been created. You then had a regulatory body that was set up, and those regulators then spent a lot of time doing research, looking at the sector, and establishing the ground rules by which the sector would be led into the future. That was in between 2008 and 2006 and 2008. Then when we came in, after our predecessor had been unfortunately unceremoniously kicked out, one of the first things we did in 2012 was to reset tariffs. That was followed by a concerted effort to support the privatization process between 2011 and 2014. And then between 2011 and 2015, at the same time while we're supporting privatization, we're also taking the sector through an evolution to what is known as the transition state electricity market. And there were a number of involved steps that were taken, which I don't need to go into any detail here. That was followed in 2013 by the same NERC, led by Sam, by the way, establishing a wholesale framework for power procurement. Then in 2013 to 2014, we transited, after the handover of the sector to the co-investors, we transited through the interim rules period, which was a period that was set up to try and just take the sector up to that point when you could have full-fledged contracts in force. Then in 2014 to 2015, we spent a lot of time, did a lot of research developing, for the first time in the country, truly cost-effective tariffs. And finally, in 2014, also in 2015, we also spent a lot of time with the private sector, financial services, looking at what was then known as the central bank, power sector, electricity management stabilization facility, which was essentially recognizing that unless we had a situation where the balance sheets of these companies were tidied up, were cleaned up, unless we could pay off the debts that they had been owing during that interim rules period, we would not be able to go forward in a situation where they could then begin to raise money to carry out the kind of capital expenditure that they needed to carry. What I'm trying to do here, just by listing these items, is to show that what was more important was not just the act of selling. That was an event that came and went. What was more important were the series of actions that would actually create something that we needed then and still need now, which was an electricity market. A place where a generator could put in electricity, a distributor could take out electricity, sell it, and pay back. All of us here come from villages. Except me, I'm from Calabar. We all come from villages, and one thing is common to all our villages. There is some place that is determined as where we give and we take, we buy and we sell, we exchange. It's called the market. It's natural to all of us. We understand how markets work. Markets must have rules. You must have something of value. You must give and you must take. We haggle sometimes. In fact, we always haggle. But we eventually arrive at the price that we agreed to, and we pay that price immediately. And when we pay that price, we take something of value and we go away with it. That is the market. With electricity, it's pretty much the same thing. Not much different. Except that it's held by all sorts of rules and contracts. But we must still have that place where we exchange. And frankly, today, because we don't yet have a market, we don't have a power sector. And so we go in want. It is the absence of the structures and institutions of the market that have been our challenge, not the act of privatization. After these milestone events that I just listed happened, there was the entry of the discos under new ownership in November 2013. It was followed by TEM, the declaration of TEM, the transition electricity market on the 1st of February. I've just mentioned it in one sentence, but it was an involved process getting up to that point. And some of us who are sitting in this room today know how difficult it was to actually go from talking about institutions on paper and actually making them stand up alive as entities that actually try to work. There was a lot of hard work that was put in, a lot of effort that was made, or at least on the 1st of February 2015, we actually got it started. And something very interesting happened when TEM was declared. Prior to that time, what the discos had been doing had simply been, like I said earlier, a market is a place where you pay value and you take something of value. Our market for electricity was a bit skewed, it was warped in the sense that we didn't give full value for what was received. So discos, distribution companies, would take full value of energy, but they would not give full value of money in return. We know what happens when we don't pay full value for what we have received. Yeah. I don't have a moment. I'm almost done. Something very interesting happened. that effort to give full value suddenly changed. Because contracts were put in place and things were working a little bit better, remittances went up astronomically, dramatically. And then, after May 2015, they dropped. 2016, they disappeared almost completely. There's a reason for that. And I hope that that reason will be given to us by Sam himself, because he knows what happened. Now, coming to privatization, the process itself has been acknowledged to be generally credible and transparent. That's not where the problem is. However, as I have tried to note above, it is the post-privatization, the aftermath, that has created challenges. And sometimes, because we worry about the aftermath, we see challenges with the aftermath, we think that it is the act of selling itself that was the problem. It wasn't the act of selling. It was the management of the process afterwards that created the problem. And that is not something that is strange.
Yeah.
All right? We have, and that's again for three, very quickly, for three reasons. Like I said earlier on, privatization has not been completed, number one. Number two, the regulation of the sector has not been of the right quality, or the right intensity, with the right focus. And thirdly, our policy leadership in the sector has left a little bit to be desired. So for those three reasons, we have that challenge. But, Patrick, if you just give me another minute, I will round up with just a few numbers and perhaps a word on national security. So the McKinsey Global Institute says that for Nigeria to attain its full economic potential, by 2030 we must attain 7.1% GDP growth, consistent year on year, so that we can move at least 70 million people out of poverty. Just keep that figure in mind. Second, we need in Nigeria a minimum of $30 billion every year to be invested to bridge an infrastructure gap. That's what we need each year up to 2030. Third, let me say this. The decade-long inability to establish a solid energy and transportation infrastructure, not just in Nigeria but in West Africa, has been at the foundation of what is our regional instability, both in Nigeria and across ECOWAS.
Sure.
Now, that is something that is happening because we have not yet fulfilled the foundational requirement and obligation on us to actually build out this infrastructure. So, where do we get this 30 billion from? I'll just say this at the end. From only three places, one of three places. From the private sector, or from the public sector, which is broke and doesn't have management capacity, or from the NGO sector.
Yeah.
And none of the three. I'm done, Patrick. Just give me another minute.
There'll be time to respond.
It's one of these three. And unless we can provide that support, unless we can find a way to persuade the NGOs, which will not happen, unless we can find a way to get money into our public sector, which will also not happen, we can only depend on our private sector. So what I'm saying here, ladies and gentlemen, is that it's not a question of whether we have a choice. We really don't have a choice. We must go to our private sectors, wherever it is there, and do what we need to do to get them to spend that money that we need for infrastructure assets.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. First, I think many of us perhaps remember that before being a policy person, was a trial lawyer. And a very good one at that. So he has actually changed the issue, rephrased the issue, and used evidence for the issue. But I think AI has changed from a debate to a dialogue or a conversation. So perhaps that will be much more helpful. Now, let me start with clarification. Some people, I'm sure some of my friends in NEC will say, okay, you're part of this, why are you here? Let me make it clear, a regulator is not necessarily a transaction person. So whether you privatize or not, the NEC will do their job. And that's part of what I would like to argue. First, I'm not going to take the view that the process of privatizing was wrong or right. I think it was as fairly transparent as perhaps it could be. So this is not a case of saying there was a sweetheart deal. This is a case of looking at the assumptions in the reform process. And I agree with you straight away that the reform process and the reform package is not essentially only about privatization. And so reform, there's no my own side is not proposing against the reform. I'm looking at privatization as a particular event, like I said, and as a precondition and a presumption. First, I'm not opposed to privatization when applied prudentially and pragmatically as part of solutions. I'm opposed to privatization when it's an ideological, an idea and an ideological framework about how enterprises and the economy should be managed. And in 2009, I set it out clear in my book, and I've been consistent. In the interviews I granted earlier as NEC chairman, I made it clear, and I said that privatization is difficult to do and rarely done well. That's global research. If you look across the world, it's difficult to do for many reasons. Now, let me take it one by one. First, the electric power policy was, in my view, largely right in articulating, first diagnosing the problem, which is primarily the problem of lack of capacity, commercial viability, efficiency, meant that you didn't have the kind of, even if before privatization we had about 6,000 megawatts of capacity and maybe less than 2,000 daily supply. Even if you privatize, you had private enterprise at that time, 6,000 was not enough power for, even if it's efficiently produced. So there's a problem of capacity growth, to put clearly. Two was that even that 6,000 net plate, whatever, you couldn't even generate them, you couldn't distribute them fairly. So there's a problem of efficiency. Three is that you are not growing the industry in the regular order in which you should grow because of lack of investment. So the policy articulated a range of options. And the first issue I want to put to the table is that if you look at the NEP and the EPSR Act and the roadmap, you see that at NEP there was a robust diagnostic of the problem and a less ideological focus, because it starts with first laying out corporatization period where the government entity, PSN, after you have unbundled, you commercialize, you corporatize. And corporatize is a process of governance, trying to deal with the governance issues. Then, down the line, privatization. But if you go to EPSR Act, it's kind of dilutes slightly or intensifies more of the market orientation of the reform. Then at the level of the pressure roadmap, it finally became more of how do we fast track the sector towards privatization. And the argument I put on the table is that we lost focus on dealing with governance. Today, both the power sector recovery plan and the World Bank plan, which I've seen, are all dealing with governance issues, baseline, reset. All these are governance issues. So just imagine for a second, if you didn't have a private entity, if the discos were government-owned and they were regulated, you would still need a commercial tariff. You would still need a clear baseline. You would still need the issues around metering. You would still need to deal with those issues around capacity growth. For example, part of what's going on now is the new performance expectation commitment that the discos will sign up. Now, those are part of a corporate policy where the regulator will demand for long-term investment plan, which should be what the corporatized, well-run entity will provide to the regulator, which will form the revenue requirement, which will form the tariff. So basically, the argument here is that everything NEC is doing could be done with the public-owned enterprise. Now, this is a catch. Of course, historically, we have misgoverned and misadministered public enterprise. They have all failed. So across the continent and some other newly positioning economies, the idea was don't do government reform, because government reform was politicized, was difficult to do. Privatize. And then privatization, the assumption was that private ownership will deal with three things. Primarily, what we call the agent principal problem, meaning agents are authorized by principal, but principal has no control over agents. So the citizens own the enterprises, the managers do the wrong things. We've known today from theory and practice that even in private entities, if you don't have corporate governance and good regulation, the same problem will arise where managers and shareholders managers may not produce value for shareholders and for consumers. So the point therefore is the assumption that once private capital comes in, it deals with the agency problem, it deals with the managerial skill deficit, and it deals with efficiency, is not true. It's part of the ideological assumption. Now what has worked everywhere is that governance, meaning the reform of process for both procurement, for both management of enterprise, and for both incentive for delivery of quality service, is at the heart of improvement, whether in private sector or in public sector. Now the argument I'm putting forward to respond to earlier or to take forward the conversation is that I think that our preoccupation with privatizing, and let me give you a practical example. Today, we're dealing with the problem of, for example, metering. We don't even know customer baselines. If, for example, we took the 2-3 years after our bundling and properly corporatized those entities, by today, you would have dealt with governance, elementary governance, regulatory issues. And then you can sell these assets at their own time, not for the purpose of shock therapy, kind of forcing them, selling them, and expecting instant result when you've not dealt with the governance issue. So my issue is simple, that somewhere along the line, we focused so much on privatizing and didn't deal with governance reform, and didn't deal with the prudential issues around reorganization. And the result is this, and that's where I really want to zero in. The result is that today, I've gone through all the recommendations that the World Bank and the regulators and the government are pushing forward. Those are typical governance issues and regulatory issues that the regulator could have undertaken even without privatization. That's number one. The second point, therefore, is that it's a mistake. I heard Ayo talk about the need for private capital. Totally correct. Please, not privatizing does not mean not seeking private capital. Liberalization, which was a policy of this sector, is the right policy. And that's why deregulation, that's why the generation component, we allow for IPPs. Not privatizing or acting against privatization has to do with capital, looking for capital from the private sector. The private sector capital is critical to save government public sector requirement, borrowing requirement from overbloating, and of course allow government to use the small funds they have for other social services, critical interventions. So the point therefore is that privatization as an ideological frame of mind that said that the answer to power sector problem was to sell the asset is a wrong mindset. And that's the point we're making. And that we could have got private participation, developed the corporate capability of the existing discourse, and then run them or dispose them as the case would be, not as a holistic shock therapy that is the basis for dealing with the sector. Finally, I would like to make this point very clear. If you look at, again, back to privatization, the NEP, the National Electric Power Policy, and the EPSR Act, for example, by the time you have the bulk trader, if you read back to that sector, to the Act and the policy, the bulk trader should have been in place even with the publicly owned enterprises. Why so? Because the Act says that by the time the bulk trader is there, he's helping to create the capability, the footprint, the creditworthiness, so that they are already trading through the bulk trader, and the bulk trader will phase off. Now we've privatized, and we have this now when the bulk trader is in place. And then we are starting a national process that require that those entities cannot even trade among themselves. So essentially, my view therefore is that if we had corporatized, then perhaps at this point we could privatize. Now, just 2 minutes. I reserved those 2 minutes. Now I said, now it's a transition. Now let me look at 2 examples quickly. Okay, I'll take only one. Okay. First, let's take for example UK, where the model came to us. UK privatized because they were dealing with the issue of efficiency, not with capacity growth. They already have capacity, but the public ownership, the management of it was not inefficient. we had no capacity, and this is a central argument. The question I want to leave is that, going by our context, are we going to, can the pricing of this sector and this reform send enough signal to private entities to overlook the risk and bring the resources to build the capacity? Perhaps we need to first build the capacity and then we privatize.
Sure.
I'm taking my time. India also privatized in a phase, and finally China is a good example for us. And what China, I want to give you a quote from the Chinese. It says, from Professor Guy, he made a point very clear. He said the Chinese did something fantastic. China delayed privatization because China reckoned that they could not, without a true safety net, in of state enterprises, protest by laid-off workers, and the fact that the economic incentive in China is not enough to create an efficient private sector market. China delayed until when it is enough to underwrite a private enterprise. And the point I'm ending there for this note is that it's not just the fact that, I'm not opposed to privatization as a policy that can be used, deployed based on the context. But we are opposed to privatization as an idea that can create capacity where there's so much risk. I think that the government should have enhanced the NIPP, allow for deregulation, and then corporatize, and then obviously at the right time, you privatize and gradually.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samamadi. We'll move quickly to Chantal Abdul to lay out further arguments on why privatization, is the right answer for the Nigeria power sector challenges. Chantal.
Come on, ladies, you don't sound excited. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
There you go. Well, thank you very much for having me here next year. I'm super proud of what you all have been doing. I've heard so much about this, and this is probably one of my first outings here, and I'm just really excited about it. And I think, to support this so-called argument, privatization versus no privatization, I think the first evidence is before us tonight. We probably wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be having a Nextier power dialogue if there was not a privatization. There would not be a microgrid conference going on right now as to how we can add power to the grid if there was not a privatization. So, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, I don't think I need to argue more. I think I got my applause over there. But on a very serious note, as Mr. Okibo introduced me earlier, we run a power company in Nigeria, and we started off as a metering company who now does a lot of things across the board. And we pretty much did that not because we were money hungry, but because we just saw opportunities everywhere. I would say to you that probably 6-7 years ago, I was in the US. And right before the cusp of this privatization effort, I was one of those who was deliberating about bringing Duke Energy to come in and potentially acquire one of the assets that, Mr. Samamadi and Mr. Ayo and all had put out as, assets to be sold under privatization. But I'm coming here tonight not to talk to you from a policy standpoint or from a theoretical standpoint, but to actually kind of talk about my experience in the trenches, in the field, and what has been, maybe some of our achievements while we've been out in the field, and comparing that to what existed pre-privatization. So if you would allow me, I think I probably would ask many of us, and I'm sure everyone here would say, do we know, for example, what is our current GDP in Nigeria? Billion? I thought I heard somebody mutter 405. Exactly, okay. $405 billion. Do we also know, at the moment, how much of that is is government revenue? How much of that is government revenue? Or does government revenue contribute to Nigeria's GDP? Okay, I heard the Honorable former BPE, or pardon me, of embed, you know, state that it's about 5%. But the truth of the matter is that at the time of privatization, that's actually about how much of our government revenue contributed to our GDP. So we're just below 6%. And the fact of the matter is that Nigeria is the lowest performing of all of the African nations in the African continent today. And we are the second lowest in the world. And guess who we're next to? Second lowest to. Does somebody probably know that as well? I hear nations like Syria and Afghanistan. Should that not even bother us? Like Syria is at the point of probably beyond collapse. Afghanistan the same, but you're absolutely right, Afghanistan. So as one of the world's top 10 producing oil nations, right, our contribution to GDP, or rather the government's contribution to GDP is at about 6%. And that same government, Nigerians, or we require, or rather should be responsible for our infrastructure development, right? So therefore, technically speaking, when the government was in control of the power assets or our power sector, right, the funds required to focus on power generation alone just did not even exist. How much more invest in our education sector, which again is dilapidated, our roads and transportation, non-existent. I mean, the list goes on. Telecoms, thankfully, you know, today is privatized and functioning. So my point to you here is, if the government, for how many decades, was running the power sector, and please, I'm not here to berate or to say they didn't, you know, we didn't do a good job, or at least did not try under NEPA or PHCN. But I'm not quite sure that we had the funds necessary as a government, and that privatization was inevitable. In other words, we could not have developed our power sector to where we needed to be. With a population of 160 million people, the statistics is that it's supposed to be about 1 megawatt per 1,000 people in your population. So technically speaking, Nigeria should be at 160,000 megawatts is where we should be. Now, are we far below that mark? Absolutely. But I'm not quite sure we could have gotten there without pushing this privatization, whether or not it was a shock effect, or whether or not it should have been systematically, slowly done. I think we've been doing it for decades now, and the truth of the matter is that's part of why some of us came back home and said, you know what, we need to put our bootstraps on and get in here and see how we can solve this problem. I will also add this much, that without the privatization, I don't know whether we also know the statistic, that a lot of people in Nigeria, and I'm sure we're all victims of that, which is the estimated billing regime, right? In fact, most people, it was a no-brainer for us to get involved in metering, which Mr. Samamadi pointed to. It was a no-brainer for us to get involved in metering, and as a company we were involved in metering prior to the privatization effort. I know that partly because I was asked to work with the firm even while I was schooling abroad. And I will say this to you, we would go and meet with our partners abroad, and they would literally say to us, what are these abysmal meter quotes that you people are giving us? Meaning you're asking for 1,000 orders, you know, you got 1,000 order of metering, you got 5,000 here, 6,000 here, you know, very little amounts. When, you know, they were built to do like 30 million or 10 million meters annually, and countries smaller than Nigeria were ordering probably 10 times the amount that we were coming with. So at the time as well, the privatized entities under the power holdings company at the time also did not even collect enough to be able to spend on metering. We also know that it was the lowest collection, right, in terms of tariff and collection as a whole that existed. But today, we go to China and we are welcomed. And I will say this, we go to China because our technical partners are in China. And as a nation, we don't have the resources, or at least the industries in place yet, for me to do most of what I require, the PCB, right? We don't even do the basic PCBs. The elements that go onto the surface mounting technology that goes onto the PCB, which is the mind of the meter, I can't even get in Nigeria. Today, I will also tell you that our steel companies are not functional. I am working on a project at the moment to try to evacuate power from Alstom. I'm sure there are people from TCN in the room. Alstom was formerly Nigeria's aluminium steel company, which was bought over by USA, okay, which was supposed to be producing steel and some of these materials that are required as base raw materials for us to produce meters in the country. Today, Alstom is looking to just operate as a power provider, meaning that they have the capacity to do about 400 and something, about 460 or so. They've got 9 turbines that can churn out about, I think, 60 or so. So they can do a total of about 460 megs. They're looking to evacuate about just over 300 or so megawatts into the national grid. That is what Alstom is working. The same thing goes for Ajakuta Steel. You can list it, it's endless, right? So the raw materials, the requirements that we, the raw materials that we require, it's been already 1 minute. Jeez. Wow, I could see, I was like, what is Sam and them doing? Why is it that they couldn't time themselves so well? I can so see why it takes so long. Okay, wow, so I really didn't even get into any of the technical stuff. I'm very much a metrics person with a finance background, and for me, I think Mr. Ayo and Mr. Sam have kind of done a good job to explain to us what privatization was supposed to be. Obviously, as you know, the 8 generating assets, the transmission company, distribution, etc. But my focal point tonight was to explain to us that without privatization, I don't think we would have gotten to NERC states that we had an 80% metering gap in the country pre-privatization. Today, I can say that, and I know for a fact, with the help of our company and several other meter manufacturers, we've been able to inject over 2 million or more into the industry, and more Nigerians today are metered, and we're clamoring and working for more. All right. We also know as well that our generation has increased. In my research, I found out that peak loads, pre-privatization was about just over 2,000 megawatts. We've doubled. Now, is it going to take some time? Absolutely. Am I one of those people who absolutely goes about canvassing for Nigeria and trying to bring investors into the Nigerian power sector? Absolutely, you can best believe that. But the truth of the matter is that we have done it, and it has been done. And I can assure you that not only is it that in Lagos, Abuja, several markets, we have increased power supply. Not optimal just yet, but at least increased power supply. Right?
Sure.
That is not appropriate. I'm sure we'll have opportunities to ask more questions afterwards, but thank you very much.
Thank you. A round of applause. And again, last but definitely not the least, and I'm really looking forward to what he has to say. It's my pleasure to invite Joe Adero to use 10 minutes.
Well, good evening. Let me clearly state that this debate is not balanced. Because Sam Amadi is in neck. So before we go into this debate, it's clear we situate it under that. I only want to look at Mr. Ayo, not from NEC, but from BP. Because Mr. Ayo was in BP when we started this whole process. And the time of Aerofire, when Aerofire went to look for funds from IMF and World Bank. And in Washington, D.C., he promised the whole world that he was going to sack 20,000 workers from PSA, so that it would be more attractive for them to give him money. So the whole concept of privatization you are saying is ideological. It's a neoliberal ideology. And you cannot generate power on an ideological basis. Power generation cannot be. And I needed to draw this clarification because the Power Sector Reform Act, which they have been citing, was a document fostered on Nigeria by the IMF and World Bank. Go to Legislative Power Sector Reform Act. The the same thing, except where you see Loseto, you put Nigeria. That's the document they have been telling you that they have done a very perfect work in the privatization of the electricity in Nigeria. And I've said this on. Somebody said that power situation in Nigeria has improved. And I challenge them to mention a new power station that has been built between that period and now. Mention one, I will step aside and leave the remaining 10 minutes. Now, it's not true that power was 2000, and I give credit to Lil Mboke. When he was advisor to President Obasanjo, by 2002, he hit 4,000 megawatts by repairing just the available capacity. Yeah, well, it doesn't step for months. It was going down and up. Of course, you know, it's a value chain. If there's a problem in distribution, it will affect generation. If there's a problem in generation, it will affect transmission. So that was what, it is like now telling me that they're generating 7,000 megawatts, 1,000 megawatts. But what is the available capacity? What is the delivered capacity? What did they wheel out from what is being generated? I think that is what is important. And let me only make this clarification. The last speaker said that they have imported or they have introduced almost 2 million meters. But metering in Nigeria in 2012 was at 40%. As at today, it is at 45%. Okay, some Amadi and others, the statistics are there. It's one thing to sell those meters to the discos and another thing for them to install them. And that is why prepaid, that is why estimation is still on. Because you may have imported over 10 million meters. I'm telling you they are not there. Nigerians are asking for prepaid meters till tomorrow. And I'm happy we are facing an audience. So it's not a debate that me and you can do yes or no. What I want to say that what we did was to transfer public monopoly to private monopoly, and it's dangerous. You know, 25 companies were licensed when in the process of liberalization, including Farm Electric owned by Obasanjo. As of today, none of them has generated 1 watt. And we were told that NEPA is inefficient. And it was the inefficient NEPA that everybody wanted to take. Because MTN has their own, Airtel has their own, and if you watch that market today, it's booming. The same thing with the television sector, AIT channels is booming. But here they insisted on taking over the inefficient NEPA. That is what they call privatization. Transferring it to privileged Nigerians. What was the value of NEPA as at the time it was transferred? Who and who? Do you want us to name the people that are in charge of the NEPA that they sold? Now you are saying the private sector are rich. Tell me one private sector man that doesn't depend on government rentage. I can start here from Dangote. He's the highest consumer of forex. All of them. And those are the people that are telling you that they are rich and they depend on the government for their own finances. And they are telling you government does not have money. But individuals have money. That is the model of privatization in Nigeria. I think we have done a lot. What we have Gini coefficient in Nigeria. Nigeria is the third least in terms of, that is the gap between the rich and the poor, coming after South Africa, probably because of their long period of apartheid. And now that is an area that you privatize, that you went to market. And I said earlier that power generation does not respond to market dynamics. Europe pre-industrialization couldn't have privatized. You mentioned UK, they couldn't have privatized when there is no availability. Privatization is a post-industrialization concept on who manages it. But there must be electricity. How can you sell a commodity that is not available? And that's why, and that commodity that is not available cannot be affordable. That is what Nigerians are passing through. We did not reach any level. 4,000 megawatts completed with them, make it base power. All over the world, America today generates about 250 megawatts by America, whether federal or whatever. Then the remaining quest to hit 1 million megawatts were being generated by private or municipal. That base power, if there is a problem in America today, that base power will be used to supply the armories, the institutions, all the high. That one is a no-go area. Today, the 4,000 megawatts we had was given to individuals. And they said that transmission has not been privatized. I want to hear that country that has privatized transmission. It's a highly security area. And most of the countries, whether Bolivia, whether Brazil, that privatized, have nationalized. Many countries that moved, even Argentina, that rushed, because IMF compared them to privatize, because they rushed into privatization, all of them as of today have gone into nationalization policy, which is what UK is trying to do in the railways. And other, those areas that are very sensitive to the economy, whether water, whether electricity, are human rights issues. You must balance social service with economic activities. It's not all about profit maximization. The private man makes profit. Then what of the poor man? The level of access to electricity has reduced drastically. As we talk now, Soka doesn't have power. Abakaliki doesn't have power. In Benin, Auchi doesn't have power. They will not give them. They will not give them because they will not be able to pay economic price. Now, what's the essence of development? Why must somebody contest to be president of Nigeria? There will be no electricity, there will be no water. Now it has become an economic activity. Everybody must pay tariff to that level. Now I want to tell you that you are saying that some said that privatization was very nice. It wasn't. The privatization wasn't transparent the way you are talking. That was what led to the job of Professor Barton. If it was transparent, that was what cost him the job. The corruption aspect of privatization. The corruption aspect of privatization. No, you are not watching the time. The corruption aspect of privatization is what led to Sam coming to office. The then neck was immersed with corruption. They were in court. Now, why did government drop corruption charges against them? If we are fighting against corruption in Nigeria, I want to, because you mentioned Owen and his neck before you people came on board. Before you were appointed, it was part of the condition that corruption charges against them must be dropped before a new next chairman. Now Nigerians have not asked questions, and we say we are waging war against corruption. Up to this moment, I think what we have is governance issues in the country. Because if you watch when Aaron took over in Lagos, Aaron was generating power and selling to NEPA at 15 naira per kilowatt hour, and NEPA was selling to the public at 5 naira per kilowatt hour. That's the kind of power purchase agreement that Nigeria entered into. And they're saying privatization is done. And how many years after privatization? I think it's time for us to sit down and assess the situation, because in 1929, Nesco in Jos is a private electricity company. And they are there today, still making profit, still doing business. How come it that Nigerians can't build their own power plant, generate electricity, until that of government is so? How come it that government is paying the private sector now? They have paid them almost $1 trillion. And they sold NEPA for 400 million. And you dash somebody $1 trillion, you sold your house to a man, and you pay him double to pay the house. What is that privatization? Is that the private sector that now has money to generate electricity? So I think there is need for a renewed debate. Before now, I think this debate is coming late. Before now, we call for open debate before privatization, but it was not allowed. I have to commend you for even allowing us to be here today. But finally, the privatization in UK was an assault by Thatcher during the Thatcherian era against Labour. It wasn't that there was need for privatization. Thatcher had a problem with Labour because of the challenge he had from Labour Party, that he now said he was going to deal with Labour, handed over everything. And that battle between the Labour Party and the Conservatives is still on till today. So it's not like it's an ideology that anybody has to be happy about. And I want to challenge you to tell me any third world country, that allow the private sector to develop its electricity. Thank you.
Because the idea of this debate is we want to see if there's a bit of a movement from the first vote to the second vote. So let me announce the results of the first vote. So as you came in, we asked you to go to menti.com to vote on the question, privatization is the right answer to Nigeria's power sector problems. 76, and this is Jaga's next, so there's no reading. 76% voted yes, that privatization is the right answer. 12% voted no, and another 12% remained undecided. We have listened to the teams lay out their arguments. We'll spend the next 30 minutes. We'll take questions and comments from the audience. The panel will have a chance to respond to those, and then they will make their closing remarks.
What Mr. Ajero said is
Can you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Abimbola Bolaje. All what Mr. Ajero said, if such a word or phrase exists, magical reality is a fiction. So there's no need to address it. I wonder why we're clapping. These are the ideas that have kept us poor. How can you argue that Nigerian politicians will keep managing something and managing investment of billions and all will go well? And I'll quickly address Dr. Amadi. You don't make up your mind whether privatization is okay or not. And I also think you don't address you can go to China, but you have to look at the character of the state, the composition of the elite, the political elite, before you know what you recommend. What have happened? Agreed to develop the power sector through government investment and management before you privatize it. Never happened. You keep on putting money, as it happened over 60 years, and the money goes nowhere. So I've been delaying the process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's go to
President of Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, and I'll say clearly one of the sector that has benefited from privatization. I think the question to me is, the process, was it well done? To me, the best way to make the sector efficient. Today, there's a mini grid conference going on in Abuja, and they're talking about 10,000 mini grids in about 2 years. Investors are looking to the market. Today, people that are connected through renewables off-grid, they are increasing by the numbers. This market, especially for renewables, wouldn't have existed at all without privatization. To me, the issue is, was it well done? I would say no. But I think privatization is the easiest and the best way to allocate resources efficiently. And I'll say that.
Thank you.
My name is Abami Felix, and I anchor Energy Matters. My question goes to Chantel Abdul, because she was more of the investors coming in. These are your investors that you're bringing in from abroad. Can you tally it with what Comrade Joe has said, that these things are not getting to the grassroots? And how have you been working to make sure that it gets to the grassroots? Because if you go to the satellite areas in Abuja, you hardly find power supplies. Definitely, in fact, you go, you will not even see any of it. The meters are not getting there.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Damien Woodyaman. I work with New Genesis Energy, a renewable energy developer. Now, my question is about the financing gap of the sector, and I would like to direct my question to Mr. Ayo. Now, just to put some figures out there, the gross valuation of the power assets, which were sold and were estimated by BPE at the time, was 461 billion naira. Now, after these, the net profit, after paying services to electricity workers, was just roughly about 23 billion naira, which was supposed to be re-injected back as capital into the sector, and which was allegedly not done. Now, my question is, given the undervaluing of the power assets in the first place, should these assets be re-evaluated and sold to raise the needed capital to bridge the infrastructure gap and the financing gap, which you spoke about, Mr. Ayo? Thank you.
Thank you. There's a hand here. Yeah. We'll come to
Issues are adequately grasped by the debaters. That is actually what we should fight with them as. They be blunt. The issue is whether it is A or B. So now, regarding Mr. Ajero, with whom I've had several encounters over this issue, because I mean, I was on the trenches on the other side of the issue, he was on the other side. I've had several encounters. The last time we had, I think it was AIT, he said that, he said he was going to mention names of those who bought this. And I said, mention them. He never did. Never did. We don't have to keep doing this rabble-rousing thing about these issues.
10 seconds.
Yeah. The point is that, you see, this wasn't an ideology. It was an ideology to an extent, but it was also a process that put people in office, people like you in office, people like Sam in office, to achieve things for the country and for the government. So if we now say it's reductionist, the fact is that you don't reduce it to an ideology because you have an agenda. The truth is that we may have not done things perfectly, but it doesn't make the idea or the process entirely wrong or something we just can't. So we should be, careful in how we manage information, so we don't put ourselves into a more difficult position.
Excellent. Thank you. There's a hand.
So a big part of whether privatization is a success or failure is pricing. How do you determine how electricity is priced? And what we've done so far is that we've essentially left pricing in the hands of the government agency, which means that it has been open to political interference, either to manipulate prices up or down depending on what's happening. Now, in hindsight, but do we think that was a wise thing to do? And do we think we should think about how to get the pricing arrangements out of government hands going forward?
Excellent. Just in front of you.
Hello, my name is Joseph Ichino. Mine is more like to answer Mr. Jero's question about privatization and how much capacity and what privatization has done. And the NIPPs and Azura IPP is a very clear example. We're still spending money on the NIPP. We've done about $16 billion. But Azura has reached financial close at less than $1 billion. And we know that they're going to be up very soon. And that Azura IPP, in case you don't know, it's being built now somewhere in the Edo State, and only got to financial close because we concluded the privatization exercise. If we had not concluded the privatization exercise, I was at the first presidential retreat when I met the people who were going to start it. That was in 2010. They only got presidential close in 2015 after we had concluded it. The other point I want to make quickly is, it is wrong to say that people cannot afford electricity. Those in the renewable element market are doing mini grids in the heated land and selling for 120 naira per kilowatt hour. How are those people paying for it to charge just phones and lights? They are earning money in that community. However they are doing it, we need to find out how to provide power for them to be more productive. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I could, I don't know where to start, but for Sam, I have a question, because this is, and Ajero was right, and Sam did not come out to stand firmly against privatization. The discussions we've always had is about when and were we ready. And he had talked about the need to have government entities corporatized, commercialized, and somewhere along the line. And I want to ask Sam to look at Nigeria and tell us which government corporation that has run profitably at any point in time that you wanted to wait. I think that was what was facing all of us, and there was a need to move on and get things done. You were there sitting, even before the privatization. We see that meetings with PHCN companies and what have you, and there was no skin in the game. There was no adding value. It wasn't the same until when you have privatized entities and the engagement was very different. Excellent. So I think that when you talked about governance, truly the governance that you expected other public sector could not have allowed the sector move forward.
Excellent. The hand in the back.
In 2010, we met with the executive director of PHCN, and the issue was we were not being paid for gas.
So we had to meet with the Deputy Director of Finance to discuss how we get paid for gas because the industry was getting seriously challenged. And the feedback was they bill about 25 billion naira monthly, they collect about 12 monthly. So it was out of that 12 that they needed to run operations, pay the little they could, and things were not moving forward. So subsequently we got to privatization, and because of the pricing issue, I want to say this because this is not, I just saw a conference today, and this is not the first time people have made a comment that government is throwing money at the discos. The $213 million that I spoke about is a loan to the power sector to offset some of the shortfall that was came up in the interim rules period, which is being paid back as we speak on a monthly basis today.
Okay.
The 701 billion that government has put as an assurance for embeds is a process because the financiers for the GenCos were about to call in their loans, and it was necessary for government to put a process in place to prevent that from happening. And the 701 is also a loan to embed, so that embed can meet its payment obligations. So we should please try to use some facts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that side.
From the question, privatization is the right solution for Nigerian power sector problems. Indeed, there was a problem. That shows that there was a problem. There is no saying that the National Electric Power Authority, NEPA, then has so much challenges that I must say that need thorough solution. And going by the vote here shows that Nigerians are indeed in support of privatization. Now, having said that, from what Mr. Ayo said, privatization is just a process and not a destination. Nigerian power sector was bedeviled with a lot of challenges, and that is why up to now, even the privatized or the successful companies are yet to solve these problems. Indeed, when you talk about problems like collection and commercial losses, ATC losses, obsolete network,
sure.
And from Mr. Joe Ajero's point of view, I know it's bitter. It's highly bitter in the sense that, considering the fate of the workers, that's the big problem, I must confess. No doubt. So, indeed, Nigerians are indeed in support of privatization.
Sure.
And as at that time, it was the best solution.
Thank you very much.
I have just a comment, but I think the comment is for the benefit of Mr. Ajero. I think he's been talking to workers too much, and so he has belittled most of the gains of privatization. When you say there is nothing good in privatization, I wonder what you really mean. Now, talking as a lawyer, I know that privatization has models, and the one that we adopted, even if it had challenges, it still had benefits, and it is good to focus on those benefits. Now, when you say the act is based on the Lesotho model, what's wrong with that?
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Jafar Ifika. I have
one house, please.
I have 2 comments to make. Firstly, with regards to metering. Metering is the #1 challenge for me in the whole industry. I don't know why the 1 trillion or so that the government has backed has not gone to metering directly. I think all the 4 people on the panel are in a situation to demand that money goes to metering. Because even if we are producing 1,000 megawatts and we can't collect the money, there's no point. Secondly, in terms of cost-reflective tariff, I don't know, anybody here who has a small transformer in their community? Has anybody seen the disco replace it?
Good question.
The community always ends up footing the bill. So what is really a cost-reflective tariff?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have just one comment and two questions for Sam. We all know that some sectors in Nigeria have been privatized. Let me just take telecoms as an example. It was not perfect, but it's working. We went from 200 and something thousand lines to tens of millions. Now, I'd like to ask Sam, if it took us 40 years of commercialization, liberalization, do you think we will get to a point where we have a capacity to privatize in 3-4 years? For Oga Ajero, I'd like to ask you, do you really know how much your power costs you now? Just for the whole panel, it's always easy to assume that Nigerians don't like to pay their bills. That's a major fallacy. My Malam pays for his phone bills. He has no complaints whatsoever. Why should power be different?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening all. My name is Jamil Mustafa. I have a question for the CEO. She mentioned Chinese partners, and I'm surprised that meter production goes to China. I don't see anything special about meter production that we have to take it to China. We have capable hands here, and you said you don't know the PCB production facility in Nigeria. I work in a company where we actually manufacture these PCBs. So please don't take these jobs to China. Invest, bring these jobs.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Whether it was proper. No, they were not undervalued. In fact, some people think they were actually overvalued. We didn't do a business valuation. If we had done a business valuation, we probably would have bought them for less than zero. There would have been an argument for that. We actually did an asset valuation, basically using book values, and that actually was something that advantaged the government significantly. So, for me, the question really doesn't arise.
But staying on that question earlier, if one of the reasons for privatization was to bring in people with the technical and the financial capability to fix, expand capacity, etc., why does government continue to provide funds to these same people who were supposed to bring funds in the first place?
So, it's not a privatization question.
Yes,
right?
correct.
It's not.
It's not.
That's not nothing to do with privatization at all. Why is the government providing funds to them? Let's not forget the government still owns 40% of these companies. Number one. Right from the very beginning of the sale, it did not fulfill its promise to provide a quote, which is what the Act says, a cost-reflective tariff. When you don't charge a cost-reflective tariff, there is a gap in your receipts. Somebody has to pick up that gap. If it is the government that said, do not charge a cost-reflective tariff, like it is saying today, then obviously the answer speaks for itself.
Yes.
So it speaks to the fact. Remember your last dialogue here, when I said that privatization or reform is 99% politics and 1% of economics? That's exactly what it is. We have this paternalistic attitude of the government that has subsisted since 1951 when ECN was established, that we should not let people pay for power. It's a fallacy. Like Yubi has said, it's a very, very bad one, and it's an invidious one because it has led us into assuming and expecting that the government will always give us power. Power is a manufactured commodity. We make bread, we buy bread at cost-effective prices. Alright? We sell maput, we buy it at cost-effective prices. The madam of UB buys his airtime, he doesn't ask for his subsidy. Why is power different?
Excellent.
Okay, so to come to the question, Nonso's question. You said, it's a very interesting question. Is it wise to leave pricing in government hands? In whose hands then should it be? There has to be the market, yes, it can, right? If the market is self-regulating. But you see, the electricity business is one in which monopolization is natural. So let me tell you who will set the price for the market if we left it to the market. The guy who controls the bottleneck through which all energy must pass. It is called the transmission. Now there are two types. One for gas, NGC, and one for electricity. Today, NGC actually charges a price that is almost beyond control. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. Just because of that fact that NGC is not quite properly regulated. Sure. So I think that also your question, dialectically we could discuss it, but I think what we're talking about is how do we make regulation more responsible or more responsive? How do we make it more focused? How do we make it perhaps operating better? That's my view.
Okay. Let me come over to the Vince and move some of the voters.
I think first, let's go to the last. The poet left. You should have been here to hear. But
no, he's around.
Okay. There is an issue about maybe some kind of blackmail that some people say, sloganeering and populism. But I think it's the other side who is populist in this case. Populist. Because first, the issue is if we do not reform government, which is what I hear, is that historically you're right, public enterprises have failed because government fails, government failure. As a teacher now, I research on market failure and government failure. And my view actually is that we have neither government nor market in Africa, which is a real problem. Neither government nor market. Now, let me tell the point. Yes, they didn't work, but that's the point. They have to work. You cannot cure government failure by privatizing. Because privatization is built upon some basic social normative framework, which is public good. For example, I just made a point about UK. Let's go to ideological Thatchers and all the theories about, should government be business, Friedman. Today, the Oracle, who set up American the former Fed chair, admitted that we had made a mistake. Presumption, what we call in decision science, exuberance. The idea that market will fix everything. So people talk about price, what do you call it, cost inflating tariff. Once you put it in, bingo, it's like a magical candle. It draws all the ants, all the financing. My argument is that no, there are certain structural issues that determine whether that proposition will work. And my brother, I think the answer simple is Asia. Perhaps, no, listen, perhaps how Asia works, the idea that alternative form of dealing with problem. So my answer is that yes, there will not have been any enterprise that government run well. That's the reason why government should now reform how it does business. The idea, and it has failed us, the idea that we can outsource government, basically, we have outsourced government. I know government is different, rules and framework. Government itself, by allowing private sector to come, and once they come with skill, the three assumptions, they come to new finance, skills, new incentive, information management, price signaling, so that the managers, those guys who take a meter, go down there, they fix it, instead of diverting it. That this lady is not colluding with the Abuja Disco to give you a meter that is maybe altered. Those are assumptions. I think that because it's private equity, private capital is source. So my answer to you is that, look, that's what I'm saying, I'm not against privatization as an intervention in cases where it's justified. I'm against as an ideology, which is what happened between 2010 and 2013. The idea that once we privatize, and that affected sequencing, perhaps some discounts could have sold, others would not be sold. Perhaps, back to Ayo's question, why didn't you sell as it is? For example, all this, Ajero was paid handsomely. Ajero had so much money that he built a hotel. It's my friend and comrade. And I argued before, I argued against Professor Batinaj in the fact that this was the most expensive privatization. We shouldn't have paid workers. We should have allowed them, whoever buys it, deals with it in a corporate sense. And then, hey, you're right, we could have sold for $1, and then we benchmark them on investment. This is how much you bring to the sector. But we sold and used the money to pay workers who are still there. So, my answer is simple. It was ideological because it was based on the assumption that the private sector works. And then let me end this issue that I give you an example. So much money, actually about 1 trillion, so much money is being used. And then Ayo made a point about tariff variation and all this. But part of this money, for example, the discourse are asking that you should reset and all the shortfalls should be wiped off and restart. It's basically is government, it's like that happened in the US. It's government as buy bad assets with under buy it and then give them a longer time so they pay if it's 100%, they pay 50%. Sure. So the question therefore, back to the other question. So the answer is that yes, it not have worked, but this will not work until you have some level of governance. And what we did was to avoid reforming government. For example, NEPA could have corporatized. Why still put the same people? Like the same question, let's go back to the other issue you raised about, I think the second question somebody asked me about, what's the second question somebody asked? It's about pricing.
Yes.
See, the issue is, and I answered it, the issue is, if you say government, the regulator fixes prices based on the methodology. And before we left, we actually gave much of the pricing power to the discos. They do their consultation, they set the revenue requirement, they tell us how they want to share the recovery across customer classes. Our job as a regulator, their job now, will be to approve, review, ensure that those recovery are in line and all the issues of methodology are followed. But the question is that this is still a regulated sector. At the time, on the act, we will liberalize generation. And then maybe when we will have an adequate supply, maybe you also unbundle and distribution. The last point I want to make is, please, let's make it very clear. Liberalization is not privatization. Not arguing that production should be more modest and pragmatic does not mean that government should own everything, fund everything. There are models of private-public partnership that does not involve selling asset that is even not enough. Adrian is right on that score. We could have asked private sectors to develop 100,000 megawatts. As a regulator, as free access to wind power, transmission, open corridor. But we focus so much on selling illegal 6,000 on the assumption that it will trigger a C-scale change. It never does. It didn't do in Chile, it didn't do in Argentina, it will not do anywhere.
Excellent. And a round of applause for that. I know you're busting with responses, but just add this to it, right? Because one of the points you made was we could have liberalized, we could have commercialized before we went to privatization. Some points that have been raised include that there is no evidence. There is no evidence then and now that government has the ability to do all of these things we wanted it to do before the privatization. So if you can provide us with evidence that we could have liberalized, commercialized before privatization, then maybe you can sway some of the voters.
Well, I'm not here to sway voters because I know the audience here, and yes, and this is not a mass-based audience. So even if I score 0 here, it doesn't matter. But from the one issue it was going that Nigerians would talk last, and we're still moving to that point. So it's not a question. And NEPA was privatized at gunpoint. And I'm saying this without missing well that soldiers were used at every station to make sure that privatization takes place. So that's not a fact we're denying here. So let's go and see. But when people mix up NITE, as of today, NITE has not been privatized. NITE was not sold.
Is it working?
As of the last year, NITE declared dividend. Now NITE was killed for the GSM operators to operate.
That's
now tell me, well I know the audience, don't bother yourself. Tell me who bought NITE. Because we need to understand this. I want to know who bought NITE as of today. NITE was not sold, the sector was liberalized, players came in. That wasn't the case in NEPA. The case of NEPA was, okay, let's split it into 18 companies. You take here, you take here, you take here, it was shared. Before then, it was an enterprise that they said is inefficient. My question was, why take the company that is inefficient? That was the only question I asked. Why battle over 4,000 megawatts? When we have a vetting country, a vetting sector, and individuals will generate 6,000 megawatts, 10,000 megawatts on their own without dying on the issue of NEPA. And this question has continued. Ditto the other sectors, they did not kill NTA before you could give AIT license or channels. It never happened. That's why there's competition in that sector. In this case, split it into 18, share it among people, and then you want me to make a point here. I'm not here to make point. But let me say this. Why is it that we have gas as the only source of power generation in Nigeria? If you know that the cost of gas is more than the energy generated, why are you building gas power stations alone? When we have hydro stations, we have even coal, land deposits, there is sources of other generation like wind, and then you are generating and you are telling us the cost of gas. Gas all over the world is an emergency source of power. But here in Nigeria, you have over 70% power stations that are gas generated. Now, and you have what we call political power stations. Why would you go and build a gas power station, on those states? Because Agagu was a minister. So he builds it there and he constructs the gas pipeline from Port Harcourt or Baisa to his place. How much is that going to cost? And at the end of the day, you transfer the cost to Nigerians. And you say we should clap, we have a structured form of privatization and it has worked. I think if that is a concession, we agree. But somebody said model of privatization. And I have asked, what model did we use in Nigeria? From which country did we borrow the model? And that's our question. Which model of privatization was used in Nigeria? Where was it borrowed? In India, you can go to a store and buy a meter. Now we privatize, in fact, in every market, even Gary, there's a measure. You have a cup to measure Gary. And you have electricity being generated without, flooding the market with the measure, no meter. So you generate, people are charged on estimation. And then we say we are right for privatization. We are subjected to the values of the market. Even the discos as are today, some of them are here. If we give them all the meters, they won't install it. Because they will not make profit. Sure. They have to go on estimation. And I'm challenging them to defend this. So these are not issues that we want to play over. GSM, don't compare it because if you have zero in your phone, you will carry it and you will receive calls. Power is not like that. And I repeat, power is not like that. For the past 1 month, there are people that have not recharged their phones and they're receiving calls. But the very moment your credit finishes, I'm telling you, you don't have electricity. And somebody said Nigerians have money to pay. On 18,000 naira minimum wage, you pay your house rent, you pay your children's school fees, and you say Nigerians, you can't fix tariff without looking into consideration the poverty level in the country. Without looking at the cost of living index in the country. You can't fix it in isolation. If you do it, you are calling for social upheaval. And I state it here without mixing words.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I would just have a question for you. Since you feel so passionately about power and what has been done, I would think, why haven't you invested in power generation, whether it's something little or huge? Because at least you would at least be contributing to solving the problem, right? Versus criticizing the problem. Because I think it's very easy to criticize from the outside. Versus you actually being in the trenches and actually, going through what we go through. But my question also, there were some questions that were posed. I want to clarify some things first of all. To the gentleman who said
One house, please, one house.
To the gentleman who said we produce in China, no, we do not produce in China. Most of all our meters actually are designed out of Nigeria. What I mentioned was that we get our components from China. We have an assembly plant in Nigeria. We assemble everything that we do here in Nigeria, CKD exactly. So, no, we do not produce in China. We get our components. I'm sorry? Go ahead. But I'm very happy to talk to you because we're actually about to backward integrate and begin to do our SMT here in Nigeria. The other question as well, the gentleman who said, why is it that our investments have not trickled down? Why have we not met it? Today, supposedly, there's about a 6 million metering gap in Nigeria. You can help me ask the government, because I have a facility that will produce 1 million meters annually. This is factual. It was designed to operate, installed to operate at that level. We're only operating probably at 70%, sir, at the moment. And that did not come without kicking the doors open and sitting with the utilities and trying to show them how they can take the meters from our factories, all right, into your homes. So do we want to get meters into Nigeria? Yes, we do. But as Mr. Nigeria said, it's one thing to take on the meters, but I can also say to you that most of my contracts are supply and install. And no, I do not import meters, we produce our meters here. So after we're done producing, the issue and the biggest challenge you have is getting the meters into Nigerians' homes. Why? One, again, there's this financial gap, where there are also costs associated with installing meters. And who do we employ today, Mr. Jerome? We employ those who have been severed from their jobs. And those are the people somewhat helping us with installation. But those same people are also sabotaging, the process. When you're installing meters, they will go back after installation to your homes and say, you know what, your bill is 18,000, I can help you pay 5,000 or less. And they will actually pay these people, and they will actually pay, or rather they will put them on direct connect, or better still, maybe take off, 1 or 2 loads or what have you. And the revenue that the dispo should have, that should help pay for everything that has been invested at the top of the chain, is not effectively collected. So I always like to say this, the Nigerians, we need to look at ourselves. Do we want to increase more? Do we want to actually get more power? We need to try and pay our bills, and let's stop trying to point fingers. I find the power sector to be the most interesting sector of all. We're all children of the same father, but yet you find the generation, transmission, and discourse pointing fingers at each other. We need to sit down and come together and understand how we can, again, bring about the benefits of this privatization effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we're still doing well on time, so I'll give Ajero 1 minute to respond to that direct attack. And then we'll go to...
Why are you not investing in generation instead of a hotel?
That we should have a generating plant instead of a hotel.
I think, unknown to you, the union has a track solution. And we are doing well with Conlog and other partners. So we are on meeting. Yeah, and we are into even, we have offered the concrete posts all over. It's being operated by the union. So we are all involved.
But you know that Conlog is importation meters, right? Those are establishing. So we should work together.
Yeah, we're establishing. But however, let me finally say this: in the electric power sector reform act, there is provision for consumer assistance fund, so that the poor customers in the villages, in the rural areas, will be assisted. Sam Amadi and Eyo, what happened?
Okay. Sam will answer that in his closing remarks, so he'll do that in his 5 minutes. Elio is also going to do closing remarks on this side. But before they do that, if you can help us bring out your phones again. If you can bring out your phones again, and let's go to menti.com. M for Moses, E for elephant, N for Nancy, T for Tony, I for India, menti.com. When you get there, there's a code. You enter the code 598241. Again, the code is 598241. 598241. I now invite Eyo to make his closing remarks from there. And it's 5 minutes.
Counting from 1 minute start. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very interesting evening. Quite honestly, I actually wish I didn't have to come to this debate and participate in it. But I'll start with the recommendation. Patrick, I think that you've not done justice, and we haven't done justice to the subject. As you can see, I was struggling with time. There's a challenge when you have something like 14, 15 years of experience in this sector going back and forth. and then you're asked to talk for 12 minutes.
10 minutes.
10, I'm sorry. You want to tend to break the laws of science and turn 60 seconds into 600 seconds, and it's not going to happen. So I do apologize for taking more longer than I should have. I'll address two things, 2 points very quickly. So what I'm going to say is that I hope you organize a full-scale dialogue. The electric power policy was supposed to have been reviewed every 5 years. This time, if care is not taken, there will be no more discourse. Their business model is dead. And unless they do something about it, unless there's a policy framework where they can do something about it, their business model will die. And I'm not sure that will be right for us. So, first, Sam has argued that we should have done this gradually. We will try to address that, and I think he did very well. Some also said that it was an ideology, or that there's an ideological issue. There is no ideology. Nigeria is one market, and I can vouch for this. I wish you had said, you had spoken about my BP experience, but crossfire is not relevant to this. The experience that I think is relevant is what I saw in BP. It wasn't about ideology, and it wasn't about World Bank or IMF or all that. It was about a very simple reality. The Nigerian government does not work in business. Simple. It's not about left or right. Is if we continue to leave these assets in the hands of the government, you will have a situation where the MD of NEPA, like he used to happen, will pay for pilgrimage to Mecca, to Jerusalem, for people. You will have guest houses that are bought in London, in Geneva, in Oslo, big cities in Nigeria, for the directors of these companies to go and enjoy themselves in. That's what would have happened. I would have killed all our public enterprises, which were designed to actually enable Nigerians to do better. So it's not about ideology, it's about just simply existence. Do we let these things die, or do we hand them to people who can be incentivized in a much more efficient way to make these things work? That's simply what it was. And it's not about whether we go to Lesotho or we go to wherever it is. There is no Nigerian way, as a friend of mine said, to fly a Boeing 747. There's only the right way. And it is the same whether you are in the States or in England. There's only the right way to run a power plant. Whether it's in Lesotho or in Botswana or in South Africa, there's only the right way to run an electricity sector. Alright? So it's not about taking anybody's model per se. Now, it is naive, I'm sorry to say this, but it is naive to think that the Nigerian public service will sit back and allow the hold that it has on public enterprises to be taken away from it. Joe Ajero sitting down there is the classic example of this. Alright? I remember in 2002, in February, in the Eco Hotel, the first time I saw him, he brought 1,000 workers into a banquet hall. And it was all about baying for blood and trying to, the thing that I didn't run. I stayed. I can never run. I stayed and we all ended up singing Isoleto E Africa together in that. I remember a gentleman who came to me, Precious Kirikali, and said that the power sector will never be privatized. It will happen over his dead body. Joe will tell us where he is today. But the truth is that there has been only one beneficiary from the power sector since privatization, only one, and it is the worker of NEPA. The entire proceeds of privatization, 3.4 billion, that should have gone to investment in gas pipelines, in transmission, the 40% that the government retained in those assets, in building new plants. Where did they go to? They went to the people that held us to ransom. They are called workers. They were led by the gentleman sitting over there. He needs to tell us today what his cut was from that 3.4 billion, because they were the cut. Alright? The same to mention names. I'm waiting to hear those names, but I know one name, Joe Ajero. Please, Patrick, yesterday I read something on Facebook. We were talking about coming back to Abuja. And you said that a gentleman, somewhere, I think it was Joe or somewhere like that, came to you and was lamenting about how vote buying should be banned and all that. He didn't know that you had a video of him actually buying votes. That is the problem that we have with leadership in Nigeria. We have leaders who actually espouse things that they do not believe in. and then do something else behind. It is what led to us having to privatize.
Thank you. Thank you. A round of applause for. Before I go to Sam to make the closing arguments for his team, please go to menti.com. Menti.com. The code again is 598241. By the time Sam is done with his closing arguments, we will announce the results of the second vote. Sam.
I think this is not exactly Jaga's idea. Because what we've learned from different economics is nudging. It's nudging you guys to fold the rug. Because after Ayo's statement, it's nudging. But that's my let's get back to Ayo raised an issue, which I raised. I just raised my comrade, my brother, my friend. So he's honest guy. But the workers and the other beneficiaries, and I agree perhaps, and the point therefore is this. When the country when I came back away in fact, and I just people experience, and we were talking about this, she said, look, maybe the model, the process we use, which is, why do you have to give the investors so-called clean slates? The idea is that we don't want them to obstruct them, let them take, and then they will be able to work well. But the money that was perhaps used for nutrient was used to pay workers. And I complained, I've been consistent, I said, I don't see why these guys will not inherit people from the moon. When the owners come, they're going to work with these workers, with say, thieves or whatever. Let them take them and deal with them. So I still maintain it was a wrong policy for us to have paid off the workers. We should have privatized as it is and allowed it to pay them over. And that money perhaps should be used for renters. Now, second point, Botswana. Let me say this. You can't claim, when I use ideological, I'm not using it in the sense of negative. I'm using it to the mindset. What you call framing. If you have worked in World Bank and nobody is against bias or anywhere in the world, you carry some institutional ideology, institutional mindset about how, first, the fundamentals of economics, about rationality, which we are now unbundled not to be so. The fundamentals about profit motivation, about how efficiency comes. These are knowledge that we inherited, received knowledge that today still the operators, Stiglitz recently on Prospect, said we goofed. The guy in fact said we made mistake. The main guy who brought the theory of the shock therapy, Sachs, wrote End of Poverty. He said we erred. He proposed a theory of say the differential diagnosis. Don't take one diagnosis. What causes inefficiency is not X. Look at the whole structural context of that problem. My debate is not, our point is that, look, Botswana, for example, has been Africa's leading performer for many decades. They use public enterprise. The Botswana wealth was based on meat and diamond, run by a public corporation. Don't fight, please. We are trying to advise the future policymakers. Let's think beyond the box. Let's think beyond the box. That's the point. If Botswana is public enterprise and got it right, why did we fail? Is the answer, therefore, private enterprise. Now, back to the issue of power corporation and transform. A good point to raise, Ajero. The Act says that because there will be tariff hike during the time of transition, you're going to build a power consumer assistance fund. Now, in our hurry to privatize, up to now, we've not established that. And the point I'm making is, if we establish that, it will cushion, mitigate, and create acceptability for tariff, like I said. There are certain things we ought to put in place, we did not put in place, because of the presumption that first, and in fact, the way Geoffrey Sachs put it is called shock therapy. The idea that gradualism will allow constituencies like Angel Rose to fight back. They give them a shock therapy, knock them off. That was the theory of protection. That's what happened in Russia. And it didn't work. Countries that were pragmatic and prudential intervene as they look at the process. So they keep moving. They corporatize, they watch what's going on, have they sell this, they keep this. That is what you call institutional eclecticism. You don't build an economy or any sector by some mono-ideological thinking that once you sell, by the way, embed ought to be there when there's a public ownership, so that they create, treat it properly. Then after you have privatized, after they have learned creditworthiness, after they have learned corporate governance, by 2012, NEPA had no audited account and we sold. That period, that was the period to create those prudential guidelines and structure, so that the guy who buys, today the discourse are saying, we need to do due diligence, what they said. Why? Because they bought a share. Because they are claiming that what they saw, there's nothing there. So basically, we are back to pre-privatization, where government intervention is going to be big. Today, there's a policy of 500 billion or so for the World Bank. Government to authorize several interventions. So the question I'm saying is not to blame anybody, is to say that we should have a better conversation around this point. And by the way, any sense you should set up a framework for dialogue. Please do that. But let everybody come and drop their ideological blinders and hear one another and look at evidence from literature across the world. What is happening? Let's not just assume. And let me close it by saying, clearly, somebody said something about aeroplane, back into aeroplane. Of course, you can't drive Boboing without a technical, but that's what you call adaptive problem that requires adaptive solution. When South Korea airline was falling and collapsing, it was the same Boboing. It was still the same way of driving. What came out was what they call the ethnic theory of plane crash. That language problem and the cultural norm of South Korea, where they defer to elders, was a problem. The US wrote the norm, and today, South Korea is the best, one of the best in the world. Go and read it in Godwin's book called So let's stop this ideological. You can solve the problem by looking at the interactions in the system, not by taking the ideological frame that once you have business, now finally, did the big shot, neck on that area with Ayo's strong support, did a snapshot audit of the discourse. Ayo, what do we find? We find that some CEOs, we are spending billions renting houses. The same thing NEPA was doing is what they are doing. But it never worked. They were spending billions. What do we do?
Okay, one house, please. The votes are in. No, please. The votes are in. Hold on. So the first round of voting, the yes votes came in at 76%, no votes at 12%, and the undecided were 12%. With the second round of voting, the yes vote dropped to 60%, the no votes increased to 37%, and the undecided are now 3%. So, although we have a clear victory on this side, you did a good job of moving some of the voters. So please, a round of applause for the panelists. See, I know that there's still lots of questions and comments. The idea is that we close at 8, we try to close at 8, but you can stay back and we continue the discourse. Just to thank you for making time to join us. This is the last event we're having for the year. We're going to announce over the Christmas period, our calendar for the first quarter of next year, including some big events that we're still incubating for January. But again, to thank you for making time to be with us, and please, we still got some food and drinks. Hang around and let's see if we can make some connections and build a network. Thank you so much. You've been a great audience.